Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Breaking the Mold, Great Learner Experience is More Than Just Great Design. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us online today. My name is Alan Hiddleston, and I'm in the team here at D2L. Looking forward to being your host today, but before we jump into things, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items just to ensure that everyone's got the best possible experience with us today. So at the bottom of your audience console, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a range of different application widgets that you can use. So all the widgets are resizable and movable once you click on them. So feel free to have a few of them around on your desktop and you can move them about for better space. We've got a lot of people online today, and these widgets will help us keep things moving along smoothly. So if you've got any questions at any time during the webcast, just click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and then submit your question. We will try to answer all the questions during the webcast, so feel free to do that. But if you need a sort of fuller answer to the question and we run out of time, then we will follow up with you on email, because we do keep a record of them all. For the best experience viewing the webinar today, we recommend using a wired internet connection. And closing any other programs or browser sessions that you've got running in the background that could cause any issues. Webinars do tend to eat up quite a lot of bandwidth, so if you close any other browser tabs, then that will help conserve your bandwidth. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there's no dial-in number. So for the best audio quality, make sure you've got your computer speakers or your headset turned on and the volume's up so that you can hear the presenters. Some networks will cause the slides in the presentation that we'll be sharing to advance more slowly than others. So if you're on a VPN, a work VPN or something, then it's best to try and log off that if you can. And if your slides are falling behind, if you push F5 on your keyboard, that will refresh the page and it should update. If you've got any technical difficulties, please click on the Help widget. It's got a question mark icon which covers common technical problems. But if you still need assistance, please submit a question in the Q&A widget, and Katie, who's running today's webinar, will try to help. There will be an on-demand version of the webcast available approximately a day after today's webcast, and you can access it using the same audience link that was sent to you as part of your registration confirmation. So please feel free to share this link around with any colleagues that you think will benefit from today's discussion. Okay, so with the housekeeping over, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to tell you quickly about who D2L is, and then once I do that, I'll then hand it over to my co-presenter, David Perring of Fosway Group. So D2L provides a next generation learning platform that's used by corporations that have basically identified a need for another learning platform in their organization. Some of the people we work with are people like Accenture, Walmart, MetLife, and the main reason that they're using our platform is they're looking to deliver a more engaging learner experience. Learning is becoming much more strategic in many organizations, and as such, people are trying to use online learning to reach more people and get them more engaged. What the Brightspace platform does, there's three things, I guess, that makes it different from a traditional LMS. The first is it's very, very easy to use, so it's a very personalized and intuitive experience for learners. It's much more like using the technology that learners would use outside of work. It's very, very flexible, so it can cover a range of different types of learning modalities and different types of multimedia and things that people can interact with. And anyone in the organization can curate or create their own content and build their own courses. And the last thing is the way it uses data, so it's smart. So where most traditional corporate LMSs focus on who's done what and who's not, Brightspace looks beyond that to try and look at how learning's happening, how people are interacting with content, how they're progressing through different topics, how they're succeeding, and then based on that, the platform can then adapt the learning and personalize the experience for them. So that's a little bit about D2L, and you can find out more about us at d2l.com. But with that said, I'll hand over to my co-presenter, David Perring of Fosway Group.
Okay, thanks, Alan. I really appreciate that intro, and thank you also for inviting me to come and do a session with you. I think in the next 40 minutes or so, maybe a bit less, I'm going to try and crash through quite a range of slides, and I'm going to kick straight into the session really by thinking about how likely would you recommend your learning solutions to a friend or colleague. In this instance, I've taken some research that we did a couple of years ago around LMSs and next-gen learning environments. That's what we call NGLEs. And whilst the NGLEs have come out more positively overall, I mean, that's, I suppose, net promoter rating, as I said 2 years ago, the LMSs come out badly, about minus 39, but even the NGLEs aren't necessarily in a great spot, because excellent should be around 50 ratings, and that's the sort of thing that most organizations are trying to target. And I think it's really interesting that it's not just the platforms around digital learning that we struggle with. If you look at some research again we did from the start of this year around the quality of learning platforms, all the green color is good, all the orange and red are acceptable to poor. Now, my assumption is always that you get something that's good. I don't think if you go into a restaurant, you think you're going to get an acceptable meal. You want a good meal. So if we look down the list on the left-hand side, authoring systems, virtual classrooms, about 50% of the time, people are getting a good experience. Portals, 50%, mobile learning, maybe 45%, and you come down, so LMSs, about a third of people get a good experience, and very few get, 10% get a very good experience. And I think, thinking back to that meal scenario, if you went into a restaurant and only had a 1 in 10 chance of getting a good experience around your meal, then you probably wouldn't go back. And I think that's some of the challenges that we have around our platforms. And what I want to do as we go through this presentation is try to explore a little bit about what we should be thinking about when we're thinking about learner experience and the experience we're offering to our employees, but more specifically some of the tactics you can use to think about a more engaging experience. And we titled this Great Learner Experience is More Than Design, and I think what we're trying to say is actually it's more than the look and feel, it's more than the process. There's something deeper that we need to think about. Maybe it's about scaling up some of the analysis as well. So just to say that it's not just platforms, we'll share these slides so you can look at the detail as we go through a bit later on. But ultimately, as you can see again, on bespoke learning content, that's where people over about 65% feels that they get a good experience. And lots of these other things, whether it's mobile learning, blended learning, coming down into MOOCs, serious games, the chance of getting a good experience and a very good experience tends to be smaller and smaller. So there is maybe a systemic issue with how we're applying learning technology and what technology means in our learning context that we need to think about. And so I've hopefully set a few burning platforms. So why is it that we don't like some of our mainstream digital learning systems from a user point of view, maybe from an L&D point of view? What's wrong with some of the traditional digital learning? Now, the things that, again, we did some research from the beginning of the year with the LT show, which is we're about to reissue the next version, actually, for just for Christmas, for the next level of survey. But the thing that typically comes out, and then from the survey at the beginning of the year, is the critical drivers around satisfaction are usability and the quality of end-user experience. Without really understanding what that means, we haven't got the details. I can go into that a bit later. The ability to deliver engaging learning experiences, the expertise you provide, the ability to deliver learning impact, the quality of partner, and the learner engagement features. Now, these are the top 6 items, which are almost drivers for people to say, I love digital learning. And maybe these are the reasons why people rate their other systems so poorly. Now, in the HR systems, actually, one of the big drivers, if you look across HR systems more broadly, and L&D is one of those systems, actually it's the quality user experience, quality analytics, the ability to deliver business agility, and the functionality, the level of innovation is what's driving people away from those systems. So there is a really quite significant burning platform maybe around what we should be doing. But the drivers around why we need to change and the pressures that are shaping learning approaches in organizations are actually a lot to do with the changing expectations of employees as we know, our workers are changing. Already today, 50% are millennials. It used to be we were talking about them coming 5 years ago, and they were going to be the big shockwave. Already millennials taking up senior roles and reevaluating, reassessing the sorts of experience they want to put out there, and the old stuff isn't necessarily living up to expectations. But also we have Gen Z in the workforce, or just about to appear. They're still in school, maybe going off to university. Those who were born in the early 2000s, they're not far away. In some places, they're already looking for their work experience. And we've got people like me who are the Gen X's and the baby boomers who are still in the workplace. So to some extent, we have a really broad set of expectations from our worker force, and it is changing significantly. We see new members join the workforce itself. What we're seeing is the focus on the desire for more personal development, more career progression, and especially amongst the newer entrants into the workforce, but even those who are established in their careers are looking to make changes. The world is moving fast around them. They're looking to utilize the latest technologies, they're looking for more flexible working, they're looking for more progressive dynamic culture, and something that lives up to a brand that they feel as they can commit to. And these are some of the things that are effectively changing around the expectations of the workforce. But what's really interesting to me is the top two of those are really touched by learning. The latest technologies are probably sort of things we should be thinking about when we're delivering learning and the learning experience. And the thing about being flexible and progressive is also what we should be thinking about if we're really evaluating our learning approach. So there's a real driver behind learning as a need. But work itself has changed. The nature of teams tends to be more transient, it tends to be more diverse, we're working more virtually, and we're using more collaboration tools, things like Slack, Microsoft tools like Skype, seem to be the standard tools for connecting, even during virtual webinars. So these things are the new norm, and again, in terms of the experience, actually, in some ways, learning in the past has led the way, but it also needs to follow the sort of practices that you're seeing emerge in your businesses. But also, employees are primarily starting to use mobile devices more and more. So thinking about that as an export and a platform for how you reach out to your employees is becoming increasingly important as well. But all these changes, the changes in the way we work, the changes in employees, the sorts of tools, and I think the growth of agile project management and agile practices in organizations are increasing the pressure for people to learn faster because change is happening faster. And that is the broadest context. And that's probably the biggest reason why we need to think about the experiences that we offer and why, to some extent, we're maybe adopting more micro-learning and adopting more flexible approaches. And if we're not, those will be the pressures that move us forward as we go into the next 2 or 3 years. Now, how is learning changing? Now, actually, lots of organizations are already embracing this. So this won't come as a surprise to you. I've mentioned all these things about what's happening in the workforce. Actually, when it comes to learning content, again, our research shows from the reality survey that we did at the start of the year, video, mobile, blended learning, and user-generated content, which fits into collaboration and next-gen approaches and mobile, etc., is what people are looking for. And blended probably fits into that flexible sense. So these are the top themes about where organizations expect to increase demand and hopefully change some of their practices. But also in terms of platforms, they're thinking mobile, they're thinking learning engagement. So how do I create a touch point? Think about customer relationship management. How do I create employee relationship management around learning? Use the data to drive a more personalized and accurate representation of experience to an individual. And that means analytics, and there's strong elements around social collaborative learning. So these are the things that people say they're doing. I think the reality of how much that's progressing is how much, to some extent, of investment you can get in those themes. But we are seeing this evolution around learning systems. In the past, maybe going back to 1996, and let's pick out 1996 because that was when lots of learning management systems were founded, ironically enough, all the way through to 2020, and that's not too far away. And you can see, I think, in our assessment, there's been this continuous growth from training and certification into the delivery of e-learning, maybe around 1999 into the early 2000s, the growth of blended learning because we suddenly realized that e-learning wasn't enough. Then a shift into thinking, actually, it's not just about the formal delivery, it's about informal delivery and thinking about how we use the entire employee experience when they're in the workplace to deliver learning. And then moving on into more recent years, think about talent development, so how it affects talent cycles, social mobile, thinking about curation, learning analytics, increasingly moving from what lots of organizations, I suppose lots of providers have been talking about, which is around employee engagement. So how can you increase the number of accesses into your learning platforms, into this new area, I think, which is about learning relationship and personal transformation, and giving the individual the tools and the support and the process and the thinking, the self-diagnostics, etc., which enable you to almost personally coach them on a scale that we've not done before. And I don't know if you're a user of tools like Map My Ride or Strava. Having those tools in place drive you to create more exercise and more exercise opportunities, especially when you start to measure yourself against other people. So I think that's a really interesting transition. But what's also interesting to me is on the left-hand side, we talk about organizational training being structured and programmatic. To some extent, those programs still haven't gone away. We still need people to be certified and compliant and have a license to operate. But at the other end, we do need to provide people with more richer and broader experiences to enable them to transform themselves. So there is not a matter of being on the left-hand side of the diagram or the right-hand side of the diagram. Increasingly, it's about being able to deliver the whole series of steps, which means that you're a complete learning organization. And that is a really big challenge because quite often, most of the tools don't do everything. And also very few are thinking at this stage about learner relationship management. And I think that is something that's going to grow over the next 5 years as we move into 2025. So just to repeat myself, so I put this in here, which stages are important to your organization? Invariably, they all are, depending on the audience that you're speaking to. And that personalization is probably one of the key areas around that part of the journey. So what I'm trying to do is just get a sense of, so what are the pressures around us? How are we thinking about changing? What's actually happening in the industry? But I think the other side, besides looking outwards, it's a matter of also looking inwards. So what context are we designing learning for organizations in? And I pretty much see this as being about designing personal, operational, and strategic learning. And I'll talk to you through what those contexts mean, but invariably, different types of L&D role have different levels of responsibility around these three areas. So on the left-hand side, I'll talk about personal learning. Typically, we see very few L&D operations focused on delivering the sort of environment that enables people to be the best me. So that's about enabling me to develop my own mastery. It's about providing me with the right sort of learning so I feel like I belong more. It's about providing me with problem solving. It's about providing me with entertainment, extension, and these things quite often happen outside the organization. We also have this sense of operational performance. So these are the sorts of things that you need to do in your organization to survive every maybe 2 to 3 months. These are the things where you need to have somebody come up to you from your business who says, we've got a system to launch next Tuesday, and you're thinking, well, I've only got 5 days, maybe 7 days if I work particularly long hours and don't do my weekends. But that sense of survival now is one of the key drivers around that. And you start to get into thinking about continuous improvement. You start to think about license to operate. You think about bite-sized learning. You think about performance support. You're thinking about actually how do I optimize the performance of people by giving them the right information at the right time, even when they're in the middle of a process. And how do I link that back to learning if it's a bigger scale program, or how do I use performance management in the social sense to provide more and more feedback so that we can continuously improve using after-action circles, using things like quality circles, after-action reviews, these sorts of things. On the right-hand side, we have strategic talent development, and this is really thinking about the bigger cycle. It's thinking really out for maybe 2 to 3 year business plans. What organization do we need to be in 3 years' time in order to outcompete our competition? So if you're in the media space, what does it mean to deliver 4K TV to your population of customers in 2 years' time? What skills do you need? What management transformations do you need to go through? And we tend to think of it as being a slower cycle. Now, one of the interesting things is you may have a sense of identity around being more operationally performance focused because you actually live in the line of business, or maybe more strategic talent focused because you're maybe part of a strategic development team, where think about the long-term capabilities of your organization. But very rarely do we see in organizations, people holding a hat for each one of these areas. You tend to get drawn into or sucked into one area. And that's one of the things that if you are in an operational role, it's really worthwhile thinking about how you can scale up your offering to deliver more strategic development, but also what you can do to help grow and make the most of the people around you by supporting their personal learning. And likewise, if you're in a strategic role, you really need to get close to the business, deliver value, and you need to be thinking about personal learning because that's all part of your employee value proposition. So it's really, really important to have that view. Now, I can talk through these a little bit more detail. As I said, we're going to share these slides, but quite often we see almost learning teams have an identity which is more aligned to operational learning, what's the learning you need for today, rather than the other. So what do you tend to get involved in this sort of scenario is new systems, new starters, new products, new performance releases, and actually it's about trying to deliver learning fast. It's about getting people to do things and support them in the workplace as quickly as possible. It's about performance gaps, it's about change initiatives, it's about continuous improvement, scale, efficiency, consistency, time to business is what this is all about. And the reason I put this in here is when we're thinking about learning design, if we're not thinking about the context that we're applying that learning to, it's very difficult to find the right tools that support that. Quite often in the past, what we've seen are strategic platforms trying to be applied in an operational context, and they don't always translate. So without you understanding really who you are, then it's really difficult for you to find the right match and think about what the experience means and tell the story of that learner journey about. So how do we follow up learning interventions with continuous feedback and bite-sized learning and translate that into performance support? Because that is a complete learning experience. It's not about the instructional design. It's not about necessarily the look and feel. It's about stringing together a meaningful story for the learner to take them from A to B in the quickest amount of time. So that's the view of operational learning. Well, the Learning Tomorrow, this talent development cycle, as I said, it's like a 2-year business plan. It's about shaping new organizations, new leadership, talent management, career development. And if you only ever focus on today in your operational sense, you won't be ready for tomorrow. These are the sorts of things that catch you out as an organization. I'm sure we're well aware of organizations like Blockbuster Video. Used to be big when I was a younger man. They don't necessarily on the high street anymore because people weren't thinking about where they were going tomorrow and what business they needed to be. So thinking about the readiness for change, challenging the status quo, challenging inertia, having a future vision, this is really what this is about. And if you're in an operational role, I'd recommend you sometimes step up to your leaders, your stakeholders to say, okay, this enables us to perform today. What do we need to have in our people that enables us to outperform tomorrow? And this is the sorts of things you should be thinking about in terms of a cycle about competencies, job families. These are the sorts of things that people talk about. But one of the most ignored areas is this sense of personal learning. Most people don't necessarily invest in that, even though it's central to the employee value proposition. Most people want to join your organization because of what they'll learn and how that will help their career progress. But this is usually sort of maybe a minute thing, so how do I fix that light bulb in my car, through to a year's growth in hobbies that make you a black belt in Taekwondo. The more you understand the whole person that comes into your organization, the more you're able to nurture them into roles that are more beneficial for your company as well. So this isn't a very often part of the L&D agenda, but I think this is something that will start to be more and more important as we start to try and attract higher quality talent into our organizations and keep them and almost start to, I think, what you might call hyper talent. How do you keep the highest performers, the most impressive people in the world to work for your company, because those will be the differentiators of the future. There is a sense of maybe having a commoditized workforce over the next maybe 20 years as we see more and more things automated. So attracting those best people is really important. So investment funding, think of them as being equity in your company is a step in that journey. But it's useful to think about this if it's not part of your natural role, because it's one of the challenges that you probably should be facing out to. So in terms of the breadth of experience, I appreciate that you may have a different sense of identity, but there's a really broad set of opportunities for you to apply your learning into, and that will drive different solution choices and different types of experience. So what can we do to power a next-gen learning experience? How can we move beyond just thinking about the design of courses into thinking about creating a design experience or a next-gen experience? So what role does technology play? How do we move beyond the thinking of courses and resources and think about a continuous relationship around learning? And that's what I want to try and cover in the next 15, 20 minutes. One thing we talk about at Fosway, and we do not say this is the perfect scenario, but it's just one way of thinking about it, is about trying to create a learning cycle. Invariably, the most successful experiences are those that encourage people to come back. So the sense of having a campaign around learning that begins and ends is great, but it's not the learner experience we probably need to be thinking about longer term, because we need to create continuous learning. We need to create continuous learning at pace and at speed, faster than it's been delivered before, and think about how we can create touch points which encourage people to develop deeper and deeper. Now, we talk about plasma. Actually, it's MATLAB, but plasma is easier to remember. It's been talking about measuring how you're doing, thinking about where you're going next, setting out a plan, creating learning, and quite often in learning departments where things end. Think about how you apply that learning, how you're actually going to use it, and how you sustain those behaviors and that learning into your job to create longer-term performance gains. And then measure again, because once you get measurement, you've got some ideas about where you're going to go next. Now, the beauty of thinking about things through the lens of a cycle is you can think about how technology can be hooked in, provide triggers for different parts of the experience. If we only ever think about learning, then we're not triggering the breadth of touch points with our learners as we possibly could, and we're not triggering the range of interventions that will help them on that continuous learning journey. So in terms of measuring, that can be anything from stage diagnostics to periodic assessments. It could be quality feedback from a quality team. It can be performance metrics. It could be a manager-based observation. It could be a peer-to-peer observation. It could be a self-assessment. All these things, or it might just be a moment of realization. All these things are a touch point for how we can apply technology, but very rarely do we think about that as being the lead. Quite often we've already given people the learning plan because we base the conversations on other people's inputs. But the great thing about thinking about measuring early is it enables you to create data to personalize the learning experience for individuals. And if you think about that chart of evolution, without data, we're not able to deliver the things on the right-hand side. When you get the machine with the teddy bear, you're stuck in a place where you're delivering certification and blended learning. So that measurement phase and providing people with the context and the information to help them analyze what they should do is really important, and that enables you to scale at a much greater level. If we think about planning, which is the next step in the cycle, I missed that one, didn't I? Analyze. I've clicked too fast. I was getting too excited.
So, David, just a question coming in there.
Yeah.
I can interrupt you. So, the plasma, someone's asking a question, Louise is asking a question, if the plasma model is a Fosway model or is it a common model that you've based on?
To be honest, it's a Fosway model that we've come up with. There is no restrictions around that. What we're trying to do is fuel the debate about what a learning cycle should look like. So if you want to come up with your own cycle, that'd be really great. And I'd love to hear other people's view about what a learning cycle might be in their context, in their organization, and how that scales to different personal, operational, and strategic learning scenarios. So we're not trying to sell this. We have no courses around this. What we're trying to do is just give people frameworks, which are beyond thinking about 70-20-10 into how can you power a personalized next-gen learning experience.
Cool.
Does that sort of answer it?
Yeah, thanks for that. We're getting feedback that it's a great mnemonic for a learning cycle.
Yeah, but always start with measuring. But in reality, people can start anywhere, right? You can start to do some learning without necessarily add a plan. You can start to apply it, but at some point you're going to think, this isn't quite working for me. What am I going to do next? And hopefully, if you start to get people into that thinking cycle, it'll drive much more continuous learning. And it's a matter of how we build in some of the generic business processes to trigger some of that, how we also encourage other people to input into that cycle, whether it might be, or just trigger individuals themselves. So this sense of evaluation, you can have recommendations, and lots of systems will provide you saying, well, if you've answered this sort of competency checklist, then these are the things you might want to do. Actually, just getting some coaching feedback and review also is part of that analysis of, I've got this feedback, what do I do with it? And you can take that. Individuals can take that to their friends, their mentors, and say, I've got this feedback, what would be a good step to do next? And you can debate about it, but without having the next step, which is having a plan, which is about, maybe it's a personal development agenda, maybe it's about having prescribed learning journeys, maybe it's about having required development paths, maybe it's just about doing stuff now, because you've got 10 minutes, let's go and look for stuff that's available. That's really important. And then the learning is all things you usually do, multimodal stuff, digital, anytime, any place, anywhere. But really, I think one of the things to think about learning is usually it comes down to acquire, practice, and do. Now, quite often what we do around learning is allow people to acquire. Sometimes with our digital learning, we allow them to practice, but usually it tends to be a scenario rather than in live environment. But the actual doing, we very rarely support. And that doing phase is really about linking us into how do people apply the stuff we told them. So if we've got them trained in a call center to pick up calls, and we've been saying to them, if you say these lines, it will enable us to upsell these new products, which will make your customers happier and provide us some more revenue. But the contact center guys think, I don't like asking those salesy questions. Actually, they know what to do, they just don't want to apply it, or they don't feel secure enough in applying it. We need to think about how we do that, and then once they start to apply that knowledge, think about how we sustain it. So the learning, we got all those things. As I said, acquire, practice, do is a great model that we use. But applying is about trying to find the points of self-recognition of how well did that go. Now, again, this doesn't necessarily have to be as complicated as creating a learning journal for things like management development, where you say, okay, I've given you this model about how to deal with difficult situations. You've had a difficult situation today. Write your journal about what it was like, how it went, how you used the model, and what you do differently next time. You can create a whole journal, and actually, you could use a blog with a community to drive some of that and get feedback from a tutor at scale in a way that actually you probably don't do that at the moment. You could have on-the-job assignments where you say, actually, go and deliver this project, or you can have manager observation checklist, quality assessment coaching, quality circles I've already mentioned. They come back into play. This sense of having a community of practice is another way of checking that people are applying what they do, getting peer-to-peer feedback. But the idea is about trying to sustain behaviours, because I believe that the issue around most learning is not forgetting. I think the big issue is getting people to do. Actually getting them to have a better impact and a better outcome, and having evidence for how they're getting better. And the learning thing we talk about Ebbinghaus and forgetting curves is only part of the issue, really. That's a measurement about learning effectiveness, not really about learning outcome. And I think we must be much more focused on learning outcomes. So all the things you can start to do in terms of sustaining learning, performance support, reference material, memory joggers, knowledge shootouts. So challenge your CEO to say, I know this product better than you. This is my score. What's your score? Here's the questions. Off you go. And there's tools out there that would do this. But invariably, you try and get back to the measure phase. Now, to me, if we start to think about this powering a cycle, that's really important. The other side of it is if we are going to try and deliver a next-gen learning experience, we also need to think about being much more agile. We cannot wait 3 weeks or 3 months to create a learning program anymore. So we need to think about what is the mix of resources, and I don't mean things that you can download, what the mix of resources we can start to use in an agile way. And what we've done is characterize these, just to help you think about them yourselves, is actually learning can be just personal. I can send somebody off to go and look on YouTube, and they will learn quite a lot. I can get them to read a book, and they will learn quite a lot, especially if it's a good book. Or you can get them at least to start to build their knowledge and expertise around that. I can combine the personal with the workplace. So actually, I can take their, give them an assignment, and they can work in the workplace. What I can also do is involve the team and the person. So actually, we can make a personal journey based around team input. Invariably, what we tend to do is revert to L&D, and rather than having learning happen in the workplace or happen within a team, people come to us either on our platforms or they happen to come to us on in a classroom, but they come to our platform, which isn't always necessarily the best place, or they can go to an expert. And the expert can go to the workplace, and actually in reality, the L&D can go to the workplace, L&D can go into the team, L&D can go to the person. The idea is to actually think there isn't necessarily a formal and informal, there's just a range of scenarios, a range of places where we can start to think about people learning today. So if somebody comes to you and says, I need to start to do some new product training around, I think on 4K TV for the contact centers, when can you do something for me? You can say, you can do something for yourself today. Get your teams to start to find out what 4K TV means in our competitors. They can find out from the website. Give them an hour, and we will start to use that as the first thing. You've got one day, and people have already started to learn. So I think we need to break out a little bit about creating solutions, but creating an experience, creating an event, or creating a touch point, and thinking about that circle as well. So it's about trying to think, acquire, practice, do. It's about putting the person into workplace. I think of this as being like an agile learning mix, because ultimately you try and combine some of these things together, and you don't always have to have everything in the mix. So actually you can connect a person to an expert, that's great learning. You can connect a team to an expert, you can connect an expert to a workplace. All of these things are part of trying to create a speed and agility in what we deliver. And it's not about what the system looks like, it's not what the processes look like, it's not what your content looks like, it's about trying to create the doing activity in people's heads that enables things to feel real and that they own. So one way we think about this is we talk about core, so context, outcomes, root, and evidence. And then you just think in terms of context, so why are we doing it? Outcomes, so what should be different? The root is the mix of things that we might get people to do, and the evidence is how we know when we've got there. So what's the target? So, and that way you end up just much more effectively outcome-driven and evidential processes and design. And so we're thinking about that. Great learner experiences is more than great design. Actually, great learner experiences create a really big impact for your business. And if you're not measuring what those are, then you haven't created a great experience. And this is what we're trying to sort of capture here in this slide, really. So it's something to sort of maybe to reflect on. If you don't, there are other things, and I know there are ADDIE models out there, there's other models out there about how you approach learning design. Invariably, I think what they miss is a sense of evidence, they miss a sense of context, and they miss a sense of outcome, and probably as dramatically as they should do. So that's my challenge around some of those models, but invariably, if you think about an agile learning mix and think about just freeing up the experience, you can start with questions like, what can we do today? What can you do now? Not what do I need to deliver? And that might be part of the story going forward, but it means that you start to take a much more facilitative approach. Now, the problem is most learning organizations are tethered to traditional business units who expect training to be delivered at a particular time in a particular place. So this is a change journey you might need to go on if you want to think about agile learning. But invariably, I don't think we're going to be able to enable people to learn faster and faster if we think the answer always lies in L&D and experts. If we don't put more pressure on teams and the workplace and personal learning to take place, and actually think about how we scale our team across all those scenarios. You might have had a question there, Adam.
Yeah, we've actually got a few questions coming in on this subject,
sure.
perhaps somewhat unsurprisingly. So couple of questions that have come in. So one of the first ones here was, what do we think about how to effectively measure this type of agile learning?
I think it comes down to starting to set clear business goals to some extent, and that will come from the conversations that you have with your business stakeholders, because usually the trigger for L&D's involvement is from a stakeholder. So it's about knowing what your business goals are and using that sense of context, outcomes, root, and evidence as a way of designing your mission, your trained deliverables, And to me, I think why that's important is I'm not saying the mix is something that just exists. I think the mix is something that you pull on when somebody comes to you with a perceived training need. And what you do is you start to say, so how can we start to do this quickly? And how we know we've been successful? Now, it may be that actually what you're trying to do, a bit like a Scrum or an Agile project, is try to deliver incremental value as quickly as possible. So if you think about Agile projects, they typically have 1 week to 2 week, maybe 3 week cycles. They try to deliver an iteration. They try to deliver an outcome and an output as quickly as possible, with the knowledge that that is always going to grow. I believe that most L&D functions are still stuck in a waterfall project mentality, where we will gather your requirements, we will come out with a spec, we will then deliver the spec, and then we will measure the outcomes at the end. I think if we start to look at the business processes that your operations are working under, if they're moving in a more agile way, you need to be thinking about a more agile approach to how you deal with them. Now, if your organization is still in a waterfall mode, maybe that's not so important, to be brutally frank, because you need to be working to some extent in their fashion, in their mold. But invariably, I think most organizations are almost seem to be transitioning to a place where actually the number of product releases has increased from, it's not just once a year, it's maybe 4 or 5 times a year. And actually, if it's in software, those things are being released every 2 weeks, every month, because we're getting a new fix. And what's interesting to me is there was a quote from a guy called, I think it's Peter Sonnegaard from Gartner, who said, every company now claims to be a technology company. And I think this is one of those things that will start to move things more increasingly in that direction. But I think when people come to you, you need to be able to have maybe a more agile mindset about how you can initiate that learning process and build the things that you think are important into that mix as time goes by. But the answer can't wait for L&D, is my assessment to some extent.
Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah. Definitely. I think I can identify with that. Working obviously in the technology industry, it's pretty commonplace way of working. But we had another question.
Yeah.
We had another question as well, David. So
sure.
Someone, John, was asking, what's your thinking on the work of thought leaders like Kirkpatrick and Brinkerhoff, specifically in this new learning environment?
Yeah, I think the most important thing you can do is talk to your stakeholders around what outcomes are most important to them. And I think the important thing is, to some extent, is we can be much more outcomes driven. We do not need to think always about the higher levels, if you want to talk about that in, say, a Kirkpatrick model. I think we can think much more practically about what are the goals of the business. Now, invariably, those KPIs, those measures of success, are quite clear, usually in organization business plans, even at a business unit and divisional level. So my advice to you is relentlessly seek the attachment to those goals that are owned and I suppose the pain points for your business stakeholders. And I don't think you always necessarily need to create a clear line of sight between each step of delivering learning to an outcome. That's not always possible, but increasingly we need to find the data sets that enable us to show that we have made a difference. And I think we need to be able to show the data sets that show we've made a difference to individuals, we've made a difference to how teams perceive themselves to be and how they're performing objectively, and how those teams are working together to deliver business unit results and what measures they have, and also the overall business results. Invariably, that will mean creating maybe more tracking around what people are doing in terms of their activities. I think it also just means creating those touch points. So if we go back to that plasma model and thought, actually, a lot of that is about measurement. If there's lots of touch points, you should be able to see individual and team and group progress. Making the correlations is probably the next big step between your business data and whether the improvements that are reported by managers and individuals in their self and team peer assessments are having an impact on business results, and whether the learning that you're delivering in a formal sense contributed to that. I think that's part of the wider picture, and I think ultimately we will get closer to providing a better reputation for L&D the more we're able to create those links between business outcomes and, I suppose, learning experience to some extent. But I think the thing that tends to get missing in those other models is how are we going to get the data that enables us to see that we've been successful? But always we should have measures of success for ourselves, the people that we're supporting, and their teams. So I'm not sure if I've necessarily answered the question, but I think we probably need to think maybe a bit more differently than we have in the past around how we address this, and not think about level 1, level 2, level 3. I don't think the business really cares other than what we're able to say the journey has been for their people and how we've contributed and what they see as contribution from us to their success.
Yeah, I think my kind of learning from what you're saying there, David, is, speak, to have the maximum impact, to demonstrate the maximum impact, speak the language that the business is speaking as well. Yeah. So obviously models are useful for measurement, but, delivering impact against the business objectives is going to give you the most recognition.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's just the focus of the measurement as well. I think if our sense of achievement is on adoption and satisfaction with what we do, that's fine. That has currency in your business, but I don't think that gives you long-term survival credits. I think if you really want to be taken seriously, you need to be close to your business. And actually, we always say that it's difficult to see how learning contributed. Ultimately, I think over time, data and our ability to capture more insight about people's personal measurement and their personal journey is going to make that even more transparent. It doesn't necessarily come from our isolated L&D systems, though.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Excellent. And that's a huge topic in itself. I think that
that's a huge topic. Yeah.
Time, and you still got quite a bit more great content to go over. So I'll let you move on.
Yeah. So I think what I can do, I think we're probably close to wrapping up in a way. And I think when we think about next-gen learning experiences and think about a great learner experience, we need to think about, I think, in the longer term about this next-gen learning relationship powered by touch points, and think about how we can create some of the structures that support those. Invariably, there will be strategic business objectives that you will probably need to support and try and create some sort of ties to. And invariably, I think that's probably in terms of your own time that you should focus. But as technology enables us to increase our reach and our ability to flex, we need to think about how some of those things can scale and how we can push a broader set of agendas, and think about almost the sense of, if we've got personal, organizational, strategic learning, what is the journey that we're offering to our people to enable them to develop their career, to outperform in their operational space, but also be the whole person that they can be in their organization. So we need to offer something around those learning contexts in a way that we probably aren't at the moment always, and think about how we power that much more flexibly, not by L&D doing or having experts doing, but empowering the organization to follow frameworks, follow steps. And I think what's interesting to me is, I'm sure if we put ourselves together in a room and said, I want to deliver an onboarding process for a new starter into a retail shop to sell broadband, and all we've got as resource are a manager, a team, and a video uplink, I think we could create a structured program between us, which would have very little L&D input, but would have just the right amount, maybe through different touch points, but would rely much more on continuous learning by the team and the individual and the manager. But we have to put those processes in. I think our obsession potentially around delivering content gets in the way of us thinking creatively along those lines. I'm not saying it's always the right approach, but I think we need to think much more creatively about how we expand our view about what learning is and how we can create the sorts of touch points that enable us to move that forward. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit because I think overall a sense of moving from a virtual experience, which is what we've done around learning technology historically through our e-learning, and our focus on content, our focus on trying to create things that can be mass consumed with massive reach across big numbers in a short amount of time, which is delivered to structured departments, which is focused on digital technology, and we tend to measure adoption based around our campaign, into much more of an agile mindset which solves problems in an incremental way, not just has free-for-all, it's not just about having chaos, but thinking about how can we create a journey which is user-centered, which is learner-centered, which is business-centered, which is much more social, about sharing, which is much focused on learners and their context. It's much more about creating personalization. I think the hope that I have over the next 5 years is the level of machine learning and data that we're able to capture is able to create a much more personalized, nudged sense of experience. It's much more about being agile and supporting those transient teams which are working on projects rather than the department-wide type processes. It's focused on communities, outcomes, and cycles, and thinking about those cycles applying to personal development, operational, and long-term development. And that's what I think that we need to blow out of the sense of it needs to look nicer, it needs to have more interactivity. I think that's only part of the answer. I think that's going to come. We need to think more broadly about what does it take to really be better at something, and that's where we're going. So this sense of programmatic, I think, still exists. The hope for me is we need to create much more learner-driven, individualized learning support as well, using the data that we can start to capture if we start to create data touch points and not just use learning, but use our business data. So I'm going to wrap up there because I think we're probably out of time. But that gives us a few minutes for some more questions. I hope that was useful and interesting, but I wanted to challenge some existing thinking really and put some other things on the table. There's nothing necessarily proprietary in what we talked about. Please take some of the ideas and check them back at me if it's inspired you to help try and take this forward, because I think as a community we need to start better thinking than just 70-20-10.
Brilliant. Well,
okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David.
Welcome.
That was very, very insightful. We have a couple of minutes left because we did take most of the questions as we went through. So just want to hand it off there and see if anyone has any other questions in the chat that they want to ask. Just pause for a minute to see if anyone's furiously typing away.
I think it's really interesting to me because I think we get so hung up on the look and feel of things without thinking about how we string together the experience. And so much of learning is what happens inside our own heads, not is what's done to us. So the use of much more action-based learning approaches. If you haven't heard of Reg Revans, for example, who was a champion for action learning back in the 1980s when I was a very young man, it's worth reconnecting with some of that thinking, which is about problem-solving based learning, where people come together to effectively act as a counselling group, but the activity is try this, take it back to the workplace, give it a go, bring it back. What problem have you solved? Did it work? What's your next problem? How are you going to move forward? And I think there's an opportunity for us to do that on such scale now, using things like FaceTime, using our mobile phones actually as connection points, using virtual coaches, using the data that's available to us, and all the curation tools are available as well. There's so much opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think we've got any more questions coming in, so thanks very much. Obviously, if you want to, for the people tuned in to the live webinar or the recording, you can download the Fosway Digital Learning Research Report. There's a link here, the slide, and recording will be available after the event. You can connect with David there as well, via email, or he's on Twitter as well. And and he'll checks all those things, and we'll speak to you as well. And likewise, if you want to understand anything more about what D2L does, then obviously feel free to connect with me. I also have an email address, so please feel free to get in touch. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and thanks to David for a great presentation today.
Thank you, Alan. I really appreciate it. And thank everybody for sticking around and sticking through. Again, if you've got any questions or anything you want to challenge me about, please do so. As I said, this is formative thinking, right? And I feel as though we're pushing this sort of thinking into the community for the community not to consume, but to add on. It's like Lego bricks or whatever other analogy, Meccano. Let's tear it down, let's put it back, let's try and create something that enables us to move into the 21st century with some modern thinking, think about the sorts of tools and the sorts of aspirations that we have, and think about what does this mean to translate into your context as well. So please reach out. But thank you so much, Alan. Thank you for inviting me and bearing with me. So appreciate that so much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Cheers.
Okay, thanks everyone.